At 6 a.m. Sunday, the first wave of bombers and fighters took off from carriers 250 miles north of Oahu, headed for the U.S. fleet at Pearl. At 7:40, Mitsuo Fuhata arrived near the North Shore in this area. Upon seeing no U.S. activity, he fired a single dark blue flare known as a Black Dragon. That was the signal to attack. At 7:53, Fuhata-san sent code words, "Tora, Tora, Tora," meaning the complete surprise had been achieved. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and welcome guests. There were pre-mission instructions. There would be a second wave of attack. In 2+ hours, they destroyed, damaged nearly 20 American naval vessels, including 8 destroyers and over 300 airplanes. The bombing of Pearl Harbor was a pivotal moment in U.S. and world history. The attack set in motion events that would transform the country into a global superpower and guardian of international order. Let's examine first the Japanese view, then the American views, and conclude with a date which will live in infamy. The Japanese government believed that the only way to solve its economic problems was to expand into its neighbors' territories and take over their import markets. Japan declared war in China in 1937. U.S. sanctions, as usual, didn't have much effect. Go nowhere negotiations only made matters worse. To the Japanese, Pearl Harbor was an easy target. The Japanese, with a long warrior history, held to a no-surrender, fight-to-the-death doctrine. They undertook suicide or kamikaze airplane as well as submarine attacks. Does a Japanese soldier have regrets? He does not say. The Japanese have a word for it, akinokura, to live on, left behind. To live on, left behind. There was no sense of trauma among Japanese over the sneak attack, no feeling of shame, only regret over an absurd decision. Pearl Harbor is located near the center of the Pacific Ocean. It's about 2,000 miles from the U.S. coastline, as well as about 4,000 miles from Japan. No American believed the Japanese would attack such a distant island of Hawaii. On Saturday, December 6, life was normal. Americans were listening to the radio as usual. In those days, the average American went to the movies twice a week. And the movies that they'd been seeing that night might have been Citizen Kane, Maltese Falcon, or Dumbo. They really weren't thinking about war in the Pacific. That was kind of the farthest thing from their minds. They were thinking about Europe. At 8:10, an 1,800-pound bomb smashed through the deck of the U.S. Arizona and landed in the forward ammunition magazine. Boom! The ship exploded and sank with more than 1,000 men trapped inside. On the Arizona that day was Raymond Henry. The explosion cracked the ship in two and lifted the bow from in the air. Harry fell into the oily Pearl Harbor waters that had been lit on fire. He somehow made it to shore, sweeping his arms, kind of pushing away the flames. Donald Stratton, a fireball about 600 to 800 feet in the air, engulfed us where we were at. I got burned over 60% of my body. We're actually burning alive. Men stumbled around the deck like human torches, each collapsing into a pile of burning flesh. Some of the Japanese pilots waved and smiled as they were attacking. The Americans were shooting, but the shells fell short. The memorial. Japan killed 2,403 Americans on December 7th. More than 400,000 U.S. soldiers would die in the 4 years that followed. No platypuses were injured during this attack. But the Japanese had failed to cripple the Pacific Fleet. All the aircraft carriers were away from the base. The U.S. Navy rebounded quickly from the attack. FDR, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a day which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Although most of us were not alive then, we can relate to the shock experience from President Kennedy's assassination and from the 9/11 attacks. Pearl marked a turning point into the effects still being felt today. Congress voted for war in Japan. 3 days later, Japan's allies, Germany and Italy, declared war against the United States. After victory, President Truman showed an initial inclination to share responsibility for global order with our allies. What began after Pearl Harbor was an attempt to defeat fascism, but it kind of morphed into the 50s, which was an all-out struggle to resist communism. Presidents have concurred since that time with FDR that national security cannot be divorced from international security. Since Washington's farewell speech in 1796, Americans' belief that isolationism was guaranteed by our location. The young Abe Lincoln spoke for most Americans in 1836. Shall we expect some transatlantic military giant to step the ocean and crush us at a blow? Never. After centuries of isolationism, this country became a superpower within a few days. Pearl Harbor forced Britain and America to enter into alliance with the Chinese. This saved China from foreign invaders, but also strengthened the communists. The Japanese were forced to leave Korea, and the northern part was occupied by the USSR. Korea remains divided today. Many wars have come and gone with the ongoing security threat today, the many ongoing security threats today. Just days before Christmas in 1941, Roosevelt declared that New Year's Day should be considered a universal day of prayer. We must learn from history, or we will repeat the same mistakes. Prayer still seems appropriate today. Mr. Toastmaster.